English people, and particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we thank you all for tuning in. Town Hall is grateful for the opportunity to invite Seattle audiences into present tense exchanges of ideas, issues, and creativity, even when we can't do it in person. Town Hall will continue to produce online content throughout this fall and into the new year, and as circumstances allow, to even host live streams from our building. Meanwhile, if Zoom or YouTube fatigue hasn't fully set in, many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form in our digital media library. But back to tonight's event. The program will likely run 35 to 40 minutes, followed by question and answer with the audience. Richard will take questions from the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. Please keep those questions concise so he can get to as many as possible. And also know that you can view the event both here on Crowdcast and over on our YouTube page if you want to utilize that platform's closed captioning feature. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include Michael Sandel with Anna Devere Smith about the myth of meritocracy. That was just added on Thursday night. Michael Denzel Smith posing the question, what kind of country do we want to be? On Friday and Saturday, back-to-back nights later this week with the fantastic Jill Lepore, the first on her new book about the invention of data collection in the 50s. And Saturday is a special benefit presentation based on her Harvard course, The History of Evidence. Also upcoming appearances by Senator Sherrod Brown, Michael Ian Black, Howard Gardner, the brilliant music critic Alex Ross, in conversation with the equally brilliant Ann Powers. You'll find plenty more about most of the above events already posted online at townhallseattle.org. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Arno Matulski Science Series is supported by Microsoft, KUOW, the Wyncote Foundation Northwest, and the taxpayers of Washington State. Finally, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, as most of you all know, so I want to thank all of our members watching tonight. When I thank you for your support, it's because we're grateful to you for purchasing a ticket for tonight's event. The response to COVID-19 has posed unprecedented challenges for nonprofits. So if you support Town Hall's mission to make ideas and inspiration accessible to the whole community, we hope you will consider further support with a membership or by making a donation through the button at the bottom of your screen. One last point in the infomercial, there isn't an easy time for booksellers either. And since we know you'll want to go deeper into the issues presented in Richard's talk tonight, I hope you will I urge you to buy a copy of the book here tonight through our local and independent partners at Third Place Books. Again, using the button at the bottom of your screen. Richard Yonck is a futurist, author, speaker, and Seattle native with a background in computer science and media studies. The former computing and AI contributing editor for the Futurist magazine, Richard has been published by and quoted in the New York Times, Scientific American, Fast Company, Wired, Psychology Today, BBC News, and plenty more outlets. His first book, Heart of the Machine, was published in 2017 and explores the future of computers that can read, interpret, and interact with human emotions. That book was the occasion, I believe, of his first Town Hall appearance. Richard's second book, Future Minds, The Rise of Intelligence from the Big Bang to the End of the Universe, is, of course, the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Richard Yonck.
Thank you so much, Ware, for that wonderful introduction. I thank everyone here at Town Hall Seattle for all of the amazing work that they do to make all of these events possible. I'm delighted to be here today for what is actually my third time speaking at Town Hall Seattle. I thank everyone for tuning in for tonight's live stream event. As Ware said, I'm here to speak today about my latest book, Future Minds, which is about the nature, origin, and future of intelligence in our universe. So with that, and in keeping with the opening of the book, I'd like to begin with a little story. When I was a young boy, I often journeyed deep into space. Many years before the first astronauts set foot on the moon, I would lift off from my bedroom at the north end of Seattle after the rest of my family had gone to sleep. Soaring into the night sky, the stars rapidly filling my field of view, I'd whip around the moon, then slingshot outward toward the nearest stars, eager for an alien encounter. The universe was even more dazzling and picturesque than the books I regularly pored through as I explored the cosmos from the comfort of my home world. But as I went through those books, I noticed something. Most serious astronomy books said little about intelligent life in space, as though their words and images had undergone decontamination as they re-entered Earth's atmosphere. Their authors made it very clear they were dealing with hard science, and that any speculation about life existing elsewhere should be left to comic books, science fiction, and Star Trek. Star Trek, of course, was the other major influence on me from those early days of the space age. It presented a universe rich with life of every possible variety. That is, until you peeked under the deflector shields and realized that almost every alien was a humanoid who more often than not spoke perfect English with a Midwest accent. This despite any sign of a universal translator being close at hand. It was as though we were being told we were the one and only intelligence we could count on finding in this cold, vast universe as we began to take our first baby steps beyond planet Earth. So while my nightly trips might occasionally find me imagining a conversation with a tall, graceful Tausetian, I was far more likely to cross a dark, lifeless void. No living being came in range of my sensors. Years later, I would learn about scientists' calculations that the universe should be teeming with life, a calculation that led Nobel laureate Enrico Fermi to famously respond, "Well, where is everyone?" Now known as the Fermi Paradox, this was one of the many influences that contributed to my interest in intelligence over the years. What is intelligence really? And how unique is it to our planet and particularly our species? What is it that separates and distinguishes human intelligence from that of an ape, a squid, a sequoia, or even a paramecium? Must intelligence always be based in biology? Or will computers and robots one day be able to think the way we do? Are there any other forms of intelligence like ourselves in the universe? And if not, why not? Those are all big, big questions that have been pondered for a long time. So for this book, Future Minds, I spoke with a lot of scientists and read a lot of an enormous amount of research. But even out with all that, I had to consider where to start and how to frame such a book. Now, if you look at my book's subtitle, you'll see it's The Rise of Intelligence from the Big Bang to the End of the Universe. There's nothing modest about that, right? But why would a futurist want to spend a bunch of time on the past, particularly the deep past of our universe? Well, it's really not as strange as it may sound. The fact is, futurists frequently look at the past as part of the process of understanding where and how the future will develop. And in this case, I took what's known as a big history approach. Big history is a perspective made famous by the Big History Project, a multidisciplinary education project that was launched by Australian professor David Christian and Seattle's own Bill Gates. Incidentally, Professor Christian wrote a very nice blurb for the book's jacket cover, for which I'm very grateful. This big history approach focuses on the very large timescales over which the universe, our planet, and our species developed. It's a wonderful, beautiful, powerful tool for opening our perspective on all sorts of different aspects of our world. In this case, I hoped to gain some better understanding of why we are here, and even more importantly, how it is that we're able to ask these questions in the first place. And you know what? There may actually be some answers out there. Nothing certain, of course, not yet anyway. But as we look at a number of the basic forces and drivers in nature and the ways they developed starting from the Big Bang, it may just be that intelligence is almost an inevitability, an inherent property of the universe. The reasons I say this take several chapters to lay out, but the progression itself is relatively straightforward. When we consider the basic forces of the universe, there are a number of general principles that allowed the stars to generate new elements that gave rise to chemistry. This progression shares certain commonalities with those that would later allow biological life to emerge from that chemistry. The single-celled organisms that flourished in Earth's early days also followed similar patterns as they eventually evolved into multicellular life. And from there, life continued climbing a wall of reproducible complexity. This is because the more successful strategies in nature are generally more complex than the less successful ones, and being able to reproduce is pretty complex stuff when it comes down to it. This remains as true today as it was during the Cambrian explosion. Now, if we look at each of these manifestations as its own broad form of intelligence, occupying a particular niche in the ecosystem and continue repeating the pattern, we eventually arrive at the higher level cognitively based intelligences we recognize in nature today, including ourselves. So, to a great extent, it's a matter of shifting our perspective in order to consider where each level is starting from. That increasing of complexity, adaptation, and the ability to respond more immediately to new information in the environment is a winning combination. Because in the end, the real driver in all of this is that success breeds success. Eventually, all of these progressions led to a not too distant relative of ours, a primate known as Australopithecus. Now, as animals and primates go, I'm sorry to say, our ancestor was not particularly exceptional. About 3.5 feet tall, perhaps it was a tad more intelligent than a chimpanzee, but probably not a lot. Since it wasn't as fast or as strong as many of its predators, it was no doubt frequently eaten by some of the fiercer animals. But sometime around 3.5 million years ago, something amazing happened to our many times great-great-grandparents. Our ancestor discovered how to make stone tools, and this changed everything because this was the beginning of our coevolution with technology. Making stone tools through a technique known as stone knapping took a lot of effort, especially for an early primate. To learn it, and more importantly, to pass along and perpetuate the knowledge would have been incredibly challenging. This was a new form of replication in the universe, the propagation of concepts, something that was virtual and non-physical, which was a tremendous shift from everything that had come before. Now, I call this coevolution very intentionally because even as we were developing these tools, they were doing the same to us, changing us, rewiring our brains, allowing us to promote knowledge through cultural transmission. I've written about this in Future Minds and elsewhere, and I even spoke about it during my last talk here at Town Hall Seattle. So I'm going to speed ahead and say that all technology changes us, but most especially our brains. As a result, this unusual relationship slowly but surely transformed our species, leading eventually to Homo sapiens, modern humans, some 300,000 years ago. Several conditions came together around that time that led to a new and very important development: language. The shifting of the hyoid bone relative to our larynx or voice box occurred, as well as a mutation in the FOXP2 gene that has contributed to our ability to develop and use spoken language. Some of the brain regions that have developed over the prior 3 million years to promote the learning of self-control and the step-by-step sequences needed for stone knapping were co-opted within the brain, what's known in evolution as exaptation, to become the brain region known as Broca's area, which has been shown to be critical to language use. The newfound tool of language put us on a fast track of adaptation because it allowed us to begin manipulating and transmitting concepts, occupying what Tooby, DeVore, and later Steven Pinker called a cognitive niche. This allowed us to adapt and change far faster than any other organism in our environment. This was our secret weapon, which allowed us to achieve so much so rapidly. Of course, this has had its advantages and disadvantages, which we are becoming increasingly aware of. Now, this cycle, this positive feedback loop, has progressed to the point that today we're seeing the world rapidly becoming more and differently intelligent. More and differently intelligent. What exactly do I mean by this, and why is it happening now? Well, as we know, we've been developing technologies that emulate human processes for quite some time. Initially, this was mostly in the form of supplementing muscle and manual labor, but this has increasingly extended to more intellectual activities as well. This has become even more apparent since the beginning of the artificial intelligence era, which began in the middle of the 20th century, about 65 years ago. Since then, we've seen programs and systems become increasingly capable of performing tasks that we once thought could only be performed by people. Logical proofs, chess and checkers, conversational interaction. Some of these programs even progressed to the point of exceeding the best human performances. One famous example being the defeat of world chess champion Garry Kasparov by the supercomputer Deep Blue in 1997. But as amazing as these milestones are, computers don't achieve them in anything like the way we do. They use very different processes, the forms of search and branching, pattern matching, and flawless digital memory. As a result, our tools have become increasingly amazing at doing what once could only be done by a person, but they do it very, very differently. This brings with it some very unique opportunities and problems. Levels of ability we will never attain, and at the same time, vulnerabilities no human would ever exhibit. All of this contributes to why our world is becoming more and differently intelligent. So let's talk for a moment about AI. First and foremost, AI is not some monolithic program or discipline or set of processes. There are many forms of artificial intelligence and many ways of achieving it. True, it does involve what for most of us is a lot of very challenging math. But beyond this, let's consider a few basic categories. In the beginning, or what is sometimes called the first wave of AI, symbolic representation led the way. The symbolist approach in AI used various forms of branching logic that allowed for the building of all kinds of rule-based systems. Unfortunately, these suffered from a number of limitations, including what's known as software brittleness, a program's inability to deal with input that falls outside a well-defined range. This is narrow AI, systems that perform extremely limited functions. But as computing processing power improved, anticipated by Moore's law, we soon had the ability to build a different kind of AI, neural networks. Inspired by the connections discovered between neurons in the brain, these systems became incredibly good at various forms of pattern recognition. This second wave of AI, known as Connectionist AI, achieved something much closer to what biological brains perform, but again, it did it very differently. Using classification and regression techniques to develop predictive models based on large, sometimes very large data sets. All kinds of amazing feats have been accomplished by these connectionist systems using various forms of machine learning and deep learning. The ancient Chinese game of Go, the various forms of poker, and shooter video games have all seen computers beating the best human players. But again, these systems, these machines, achieve this through very different means from how any of us would. Which brings us to AI's third wave. In recent years, research labs and institutions have been working on the next generation of AI tools, where the first wave's symbolist AI described and the second wave's connectionist AI categorized. This third wave seeks to explain, focusing on the abstract thinking and reasoning we perform so naturally. This next phase is working to give AI the ability to reason, to have contextual understanding and common sense, to understand cause and effect, and to be able to learn from limited input by drawing on prior knowledge, much as a young child does. Why are they doing this? Because it will lead to far more powerful and useful tools for our increasingly complex world. Of course, we should expect this to lead to new challenges as well. Now, while this will expand the tasks these systems can perform, they still won't achieve them by the same means we do. Yes, we may see some of the solutions inspired by biological processes, but the implementations will still be based on mathematics, signal processing, digital logic, and so forth. That is very different from our own. At least this will be the case for many years to come. Nonetheless, this third stage will see AI surpass us in so many more ways. This next phase will probably go on for decades, and as it does, more and more feedback loops will allow AI to advance and perpetuate itself. While it will still need human hands, minds, and economics to drive it for some time to come, it will also become increasingly capable and therefore increasingly valuable to us. Will this one day lead to the much vaunted singularity, that hypothetical moment in the future when rapidly self-improving programs give rise to an AI many times more intelligent than the entire human race? There are some reasons for and against such an event occurring, so perhaps and perhaps not. But if it does happen, we probably won't know about it until we're well in the midst of it. It's often been suggested that if we are to protect ourselves from such a development, it will be through our own rising to a higher level, becoming a far more intelligent species than we are today. Achieved through what has been called intelligence augmentation, this will involve the improvement of our own natural intelligence through technological means, such as brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs. I say will rather than could because we are already well on our way to making this a reality. For centuries, we have used technology to augment our abilities to interact with and influence the world. Spoken language, the written word, libraries, media, the internet, smartphones, and so on. Though it may rub some people the wrong way, we are already a biological technological hybrid, much as we've seen described between the covers of science fiction stories for many decades. This is a path we've been on for a very long time, and there's no sign we'll turn back anytime soon. While smartphones and other technologies have contributed to our becoming a hybrid species, there are other interface technologies that will take this still further in the coming decades. The smart glasses and smart lenses that will become prevalent during the next 2 decades will certainly promote this, but ultimately it will be the BCIs, the brain-computer interfaces, that complete the most intimate connection between these two long-term partners, ourselves and our machines. Now, before you go thinking this is going to turn all of us into the Borg or some hive mind organism, keep several things in mind. Though we've had BCI demonstrations of simple communication, wheelchair and robotics operations, sending messages on Twitter, and even video game playing, this technology is a long way from prime time. You might have heard about the recent demonstration of Elon Musk's Neuralink technology, which many in the field saw as neuroscience theater. But that's not to say that important progress isn't being made, both at Neuralink and in labs all over the world. It will take time, but we will one day see BCIs become very widely adopted technology. What seems unwieldy and even dehumanizing today will in time become imperceptible, essential, and perhaps even fashionable. But until then, many ethical issues still stand in the way because we're talking about putting something very foreign inside of our skulls. Therefore, it's safe to say that when it comes to people, this kind of technology will only be used for therapeutic purposes for quite a while before it ever sees widespread elective use. But that day is coming, and when BCIs do become widespread, the ways we interact with our world and with each other will change very dramatically. Perhaps we'll one day see this as being as significant as our acquisition of language itself. We'll have access to information and abilities that would have seemed superhuman to our ancestors. In time, it could even lead to the next stage of human evolution. And as the centuries progress, we may discover that we have become a very different species. Now, some people may wonder why anyone would want a BCI or many of the technologies I'm talking about tonight. After all, we've managed just fine without them for all these millennia. But of course, everything changes once someone else has access to a new technology and starts using it, when it's in their hands, but not yours. Recall that when computers and cell phones and smartphones first came out, many people didn't see the point. But as these tools became more widespread and the technologies matured, they conveyed more than just status. They gave their users an advantage, and that advantage grew to become a bigger advantage still. It got so not having a cell phone or a computer would hinder you in your job, in your relationships, and in society in general. Because all of the aforementioned technologies augment us. They make us more efficient, giving us access to information and resources that would be impossible to get otherwise. They make us more competitive in a world that is most certainly not standing still. Unfortunately, while these technologies give us all kinds of new abilities, they also lead to new vulnerabilities too. The nature of our increasingly intelligent devices, combined with their access to the internet, mean they can be hacked, and brain-computer interfaces will be no different. After all, as an interface, these are means of communicating with our resources and with each other. You know how serious it can be when your computer or phone is hacked, or those of the businesses and financial institutions you deal with. So ask yourself, how serious is it going to be when it becomes possible to hack your BCI, to hack your brain? Again, this sounds like science fiction, but the proof of concept work has already been done. All kinds of medical devices that connect to or are even implanted in bodies have been shown to be vulnerable to hacking. Why should BCIs be any different? Which raises the question, what safeguards will we need to protect ourselves? What kinds of filters and detection and remediation will it take to keep us safe? But for all these worries, you can be sure that we'll find ways to move ahead, adopting our new devices and finding all kinds of new ways and uses for them. As we look still further ahead, one concept I write about that may be a century or more in the future are cognitive clones, digital emissaries that, for all purposes, are us. These cognitive clones would have all of our knowledge and experiences up to the point of their instantiation, that is, when they're created digitally from our memories, after which point they could engage in all kinds of digital activities for our benefit. Then, after fulfilling those tasks, their experiences could be reintegrated in order to become part of our own memories. This could be both a very powerful tool and a very dangerous one. It also raises an enormous number of legal and ethical issues that we'll have to contend with as that technology develops. Another possibility in all of this is mind casting, the recording and sharing of our internal experiences. Ray Kurzweil has called something similar to this experience beaming. Mind casting could become a major entertainment medium, a form of therapy, or even a kind of digital drug. A person, perhaps a celebrity, might record a segment of their daily life that others could download and no doubt pay for in order to share in that experience with an audience of fans. Or shared live mindcasts could become a form of public performance with entire stadiums of people taking part. Couples might share experiences with each other in order to help their relationships, or perhaps not. Whatever all of this becomes, we're looking ahead to a world that is very differently intelligent. Now, one of the things increasingly complex and intelligent processes do is they use more energy. This is a well-documented relationship I explore at length, and one of the keys to the rise of intelligence here on Earth and possibly in other parts of the universe. Not only is this pattern growing exponentially, but it also appears to be occurring on quasi-exponentially shorter time frames. This is and will continue to lead to our seeking out new and greater energy sources, moving into space to increase our access to the sun's energy and eventually other sources beyond that. Space-based solar power will no doubt be one such form, probably beginning sometime later this century. In 1964, observations about such energy trends led Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev to propose a new measure for how advanced and presumably intelligent a civilization was, if one was ever encountered. Now known as the Kardashev Scale, this initially began with 3 classifications of civilizations. Type 1 was a planetary civilization capable of using all of the energy that fell on its planet. Type 2, a stellar civilization, could access and control all of the output of its own star. And a galactic civilization would be a type 3, being capable of controlling its entire galaxy's energy output. Presumably, such a civilization would be millions of years more advanced than ourselves. Now, this is a roughly logarithmic scale, and you might be forgiven if you assumed Earth is a type 1 civilization, but that's still far off. We're closer to somewhere between 0.5 and 0.7, so it might be 1 or 2 centuries before we actually achieve type 1 status. One assumption from all of this, an assumption that isn't necessarily true, is that these more advanced civilizations are going to leave an energy signature that could make them possible to spot. So there have been some surveys designed to search for these. Ghatseti, which stands for Glimpsing Heat from Alien Technologies, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is one of these. But after a search of 100,000 galaxies, the survey found no sign of any Type 3 candidates. Admittedly, this was an extremely tiny subset of the universe, but for many reasons, it may be a very long time before we find other intelligent life beyond our planet. My view is that while there may be other forms of intelligence in the universe, we don't know which, if any, will be immediately recognizable to us. Because of this, as well as the vast distances involved, even within our own little galaxy, we may be alone for a very, very long time. Some people feel our isolation in the universe, combined with our minuscule scale amidst all of this vastness, makes us insignificant. But I prefer to look at it another way. So far as we know, we are utterly unique in the universe in our ability to bring subjectivity into the equation. As witnesses to the history, the unfolding, and the future of the cosmos, we provide it with meaning as nothing else can. To paraphrase an old philosophical question, if a planet forms, if a star explodes, if an organism evolves, and there's no one there to witness it, did it really happen? This, to my mind, is one of the truly profound meanings of our existence in this, our increasingly intelligent universe. Thank you, and be safe.
All right, so my name is Shane, and I'm an event manager here at Town Hall Seattle. We're going to move now to audience questions, and we just ask if you're in Crowdcast, you can submit your questions down below in the Ask the Question field. If you're in YouTube, you can put them in the chat, and I'm keeping tabs on that as well. Please just try to keep your questions short and concise so we can try to get through all of them. So to kick things off, so Richard, does this mean that we'll be able to one day upload our minds into a computer? Think maybe like the Matrix, that sort of thing?
It's a big question. It's an open question. Thank you, Shane, and a really good one. We've got examples like the Matrix. I don't know if anybody's been following a comedy series recently that I was interviewed about called Upload on Amazon. That's much more of a tongue-in-cheek approach to it. The fact is that, as I was saying about how machines and computers think very differently from us, they also are very, very different substrates. So while there is an enormous amount of work being done to look at emulating and replicating human thought, the idea of being able to accurately represent our minds becomes a real open question. Whether or not we can actually achieve the level of replication at a fine enough granular level to be able to make that actually happen, to be able to not just capture a verisimilitude of us, but that it would actually still have the emergent properties of our consciousness and so forth. It's a really open question, I feel. Have a whole chapter exploring the work that's being done in labs around the world, trying to find out just how much we can replicate and model the human mind, human brain, in silico, in a computer.
And sort of tying into that, will these super intelligent computers ever become conscious?
Again, so it's a great question, and it's one of those where when you talk about knowing if a machine is conscious, Alexa can tell you that it's conscious. The robot Sophia can tell you it's has self-awareness. That doesn't mean it does. Even if it gets to a point, one of these systems, where they are so good that we are convinced that there's something there, that there is self-awareness there. That doesn't necessarily mean that is true. There was a movie a couple of years ago, Ex Machina, which is a really worthwhile film to watch. But in that movie, there's this AI that the audience really starts rooting for, starts to feel for. But the fact is, there is nothing in that program, in that film, to say definitively that AI is actually experiencing, is actually anything more than a very, very sophisticated program. So there are some aspects of consciousness that I think will be more easily replicated than others. Consciousness is one of those words that AI pioneer Marvin Minsky used to refer to as a suitcase word. Essentially, it has many, many different meanings packed into it. There are experiential consciousness, access consciousness, self-awareness, various aspects of empathy. That some of those things may be more easy for a system or a program to replicate than perhaps something as complex as experiential consciousness.
All right. So James is asking, you speak of the rise of intelligence. What about the fall of intelligence?
It's a question that I think all of us occasionally feel we have to ask these days. So thank you for that. Really, again, when we look at the very, very large scale view that you can get from something like the Big History Project, what we are talking about, whether we're looking at decades, centuries here during human civilization, our current events really are a drop in they're a blink of an eye. They really don't. If you look at a progression, you're going to see a very, very smooth upward line overall. Will we be a species that can continue in our intelligence, or are we going to make some very, very big mistakes? We hope that we're going to be intelligent and wise enough to find our way out of various problems we are creating, and those that aren't necessarily of our own making, but will still threaten us down the road. So I think that, yes, you can argue that individuals, groups, society in general, we are conscious. We have all kinds of aspects of cognitive bias that occur that other animals don't have to contend with. So this is something that it creates its own challenges, but it's also among our evolved strengths. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, but again, it's a question that could probably be talked about all night.
So this next question comes from Rich, and Rich asks, Elon Musk often talks about a set of futures being possible, and there being varying probabilities that they will come true. What's the most worrisome likely reality you are worried about, and a much more positive one you think we should reach for?
Well, what Elon is talking about there is actually a very common aspect of futures thinking. It's an excellent question and topic to explore, since we're talking about the future. So when futurists explore and talk about and try to delve into where the possible futures are, we recognize that there is no definite future. The future is not, there are so many different ways, depending on different choices any number of us make, different eventualities that we can't even know about in nature and so forth, that we have to make certain assumptions about, okay, this is high risk, possibly low, possibly medium possibility type of future. Here's something over here, very high probability, maybe not so different from where our current established future is. It's a matter of looking at those different futures to prepare and be ready for those that could really catch us unawares or cause an enormous amount of damage. Something like climate change is certainly one where we want to be looking at and exploring, how can we change and improve this? What is it going to take in our current day activities to change that future for the better? Because as with so many futures, the earlier that you can start, and we are starting late, the earlier you can start, the more impact you can potentially have on making that future a reality. As for what is a future I would probably want to be working toward, I think that's an important one. I think that there are a lot of people like Elon Musk who are concerned about what could happen with AI, concerns about the singularity, the idea of a super intelligent supercomputer or program. That one's a little more lower probability. So while it's a very, very high risk future, it's not something we should be putting at the front of our list. On the other hand, doesn't mean we shouldn't be exploring it, because that is how we are prepared in the eventuality that it does happen.
This next question comes from Jacob, and Jacob asks, what part do you think that religion might have played in the evolution of our intelligence?
Ooh, big question. We have a lot of different social mechanisms that have occurred throughout history that have contributed to our socialization. A great deal of our intellect and our power, as a species, is based around our existence as a social integrated unit. The idea that we can actually communicate concepts is only of value if we have other people to communicate them with. So that gives us an enormous amount of strength and ability to grow as a civilization, which in many respects is its own form of intelligence. So in many respects, religion plays, I believe, a really crucial role, particularly at certain points in history, for unifying humanity or groups of humanity. Has created some problems too, but it does act as a unifying force through different parts of history, most certainly.
Mm-hmm. I was just kind of curious. I was thinking back on your example of kind of the rise of the supercomputers, if you will, and the example of, the playing the chess. How do you kind of see attitudes have changed over years, decades, with the rise of machines and AI and that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. Excellent question, and it's actually one that I think off the top of my head has evolved throughout these decades. When the AI really got going, we look back to Dartmouth 1956 as kind of being a point when there was a summer workshop that a lot of people who had been working in AI already, but different parts of it, got together to try to overcome or to deal with what they saw as many of the challenges of the time. And they felt that they could achieve a great deal more than they did in the matter of a year or two. They did certainly move things along, but excuse me, there was a lot of optimism during that early period, thinking that we had human equivalent thinking machines on the horizon, only a decade away. We have since learned that that is going to take a lot longer, certainly a number of more decades to go now. But as far as attitudes, that has also changed and shifted through that time. Certainly, we are in a period right now where there's a lot of negative feelings about some of the things that can be done with AI. What I think a lot of people don't recognize is just how much it takes place in our world every day, our daily lives, our households, that in which AI is essential. It's a part of it now. So it AI is something that is considered to be artificial intelligence until it kind of disappears into the environment and we don't really notice it anymore, but it's there doing things for us, including many of the things that we're doing tonight. But there was funding that went on. We had a few what were known as AI winters in the 70s and 80s, where essentially the expectations got way ahead of the reality. And so different funders, particularly government funding, really dried up during that period. It didn't eliminate AI. A lot of the good work continued, but some programs that probably needed to kind of, weren't really turning up any results, probably needed to be winnowed out at that point. But so yes, we have definite waves of optimism and pessimism, both by the public and by the funders.
Great. So this is going to be our last question for the evening.
Mm-hmm.
This is from Herman, who commented on YouTube. With respect to how Google Glass turned out and Clearview, what protections do you imagine will be in place for one's privacy in public?
So it's an excellent question. Thank you, Herman. When it comes to privacy, we're the ones who are responsible. The systems are not going to build in any features that we don't design into them. And this is a function, I believe, that we really need to start talking about more and more with technological development anyway. And it goes beyond just the matter of privacy. When we design a new technology, we really need to start having more of a process that incorporates design thinking, an exploration of equity issues, of different types of problems that can arise out of that new technology, and try to build in safeguards. I spoke a little bit earlier on about hackable medical implants, and this is definitely been addressed to a degree, but early on, when some of the first devices were being created, they were wirelessly addressable at a certain stage, but they didn't have adequate encryption, and so they needed to go back to the drawing board and start, actually incorporating more of that, or putting in other safeguards. The that's fine with something that you can kind of go back and have a bit of a do-over. On the other hand, 1969, we had the ARPANET being created by the U.S. Defense Department, and it was essentially for communication between trusted entities, universities and government institutions. And some of the early assumptions about what was going to be, how it was going to be used, and who was going to be on the other end of the line, created a foundation that really would have been nice if we had approached it a little differently, because years later it was turned over to the public, became the internet, and all of a sudden we had these levels of anonymity, aspects of increasing power, but also the fact that you did not have the ability to necessarily trust the people at the other end. And it wasn't until really the 90s and the beginning of the World Wide Web that we started seeing the transactions, financial transactions taking place. And all of a sudden, there was all of this incentive for various parties to start seeing what kind of extra money they could siphon off of this through differing methods, including various forms of hacking.
All right. Well, any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Well, it's been wonderful to be speaking with you, and I so appreciate Town Hall Seattle as an institution and personally for your opening your doors to me this evening. My final thoughts is pretty much this book has a lot of information in it, a lot more than we covered tonight. Many chapters about differing aspects about our future, and certainly an exploration about the nature of intelligence. So yes, I'm delighted to have people buy it and share it with friends and talk about it, and certainly reach out to me if you want to have some conversation around it. So thank you everyone so much for this evening.
Perfect. And I want to thank you, Richard, for being here. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and being here this evening. If you enjoyed this event, you can find many more like it on our website, townhallseattle.org. We hope you'll consider making a donation, as your support will continue will allow us to continue to provide events just like this one. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Richard's book, Future Minds, The Rise of Intelligence from the Big Bang to the End of the Universe, please use the link on this live stream page to purchase through our friends at Third Place Books. And finally, thank you again for being here. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.